This video is brought to you by my supporters on Patreon. Hi guys, I'm here with a video showing you how I made my Moroha cosplay. I'm sorry if I butchered that. I haven't heard it pronounced, so I have no idea how to pronounce it. Anyways, for this cosplay, I used McCall's M7789 pattern for the pants, and then Simplicity's, if I can speak, 8318 pattern for the top. And I pretty heavily altered both of these patterns. For the McCall's pattern, I turned the pants into shorts and used my own method of a waistband because I wanted an elastic waistband because that's just easiest. And then for the Simplicity pattern, I just altered the sleeve length and the shirt length and made it a teensy bit more form-fitting because it was way too baggy to start with. Once I had those patterns edited and altered to my liking, I just made alterations on the actual pattern itself. However, you can totally make a mock-up. But once I did have that all figured out, I went ahead and cut that out on my fabric. And I'm pretty sure for this entire costume, I used broadcloth. For the top and shorts, you can pretty much just follow the pattern instructions step by step. That's what I did, just accommodating them to the alterations that I had made. However, I'll still go over those steps in this video anyways. To start off, I fold the sleeves in half and pin that seam shut and then sew it shut. Next, I pinned the top together, so I pinned along the side and along the shoulder. Be sure to leave an opening at the top of the shirt so that you can put the sleeves in. I altered the width of the sleeves, so for me, when putting in the sleeves or leaving the opening open, I held the sleeves up to the shirt and then just removed pins from that area and pinned where I was supposed to start sewing from in order to sew the sides shut. Then go ahead and sew down everything you just pinned. Now I go ahead and iron everything, and when I iron these, I press open the seams so that these seams that we just sewed lay nice and flat. It just makes the inside of the garment look a bit neater. After that is all ironed, I go ahead and pin the sleeves to the top and then sew those into place. Next, I double fold over the raw edges of the bottom of the shirt and the bottom of the sleeves inward so that we have this nice, clean, finished hem to the bottom of the garment. go ahead and sew that down once it's all pinned into place. You can also iron it before this. It can make sewing easier. However, I ironed it after. Next, I'm making what is basically a really wide bias tape that goes along the neckline and opening of the shirt. And to do that, I fold over only once both sides of this really long rectangle, iron that down, and then I take that whole thing and fold it in half and iron it. Before you do that, it is a good idea to sew the 2 halves of the bias tape because this pattern calls for 2 halves of it. Sew those together at the center back, press open that seam, and then iron it. I had to go back and do that real quick. But it's way easier if you do all of that before you even start ironing. Once that is all ironed and ready to be attached to the shirt, go ahead and attach it to the shirt. I line it up at the center back and then work my way down one side and then go back to the center back and work my way down the other side. And then I sew it into place in the same order that I pinned it. When I get to the end of the shirt, I cut off any excess, not fully, I leave about 1/2 inch of the bias, and then I fold that inwards and sew that down. I tried it on and realized I had to make a teeny bit of an adjustment to the waist, so I went ahead and did that. I just pinned where I needed it to be taken in, sewed along that, and then cut off the excess fabric and pressed those seams open once again. Next, I quickly made the bow and belt. The belt is about 4 to 5 inches wide and is a big enough rectangle to wrap twice around my waist and then some. And then the bow is about 2 or 3 inches wide and it's long enough for me to tie in a bow. I did double up the fabric. I like having double layers on this kind of thing. It just kind of makes it nicer and more sturdy. So I sew together any center seam if you need it. For me, my fabric wasn't long enough to do this, so it does have a seam line. And then I sew the top and bottom edges to one another, like place right sides together, sew the top and bottom, and then turn it right side out. Basically, you should have a very long rectangular tube by the end of this. Once those pieces are sewed together, go ahead and turn that fabric or the belt and bow right side out and then iron it down so that the seams lie on the top and bottom and nice and flat. The ends should still be open at this point, so go ahead and fold them inwards and then top stitch those closed. And that'll finish the belt and bow. You just tie the bow, the hair bow, into a bow when you put it on, and you just tie the belt around your waist and then into a bow when you put that on. Onto the shorts, I start by pinning the center front and center back seams together and then sew that down. Then I take my iron to press open those seams. Then I take the front half of the pockets and place that onto the right side of the front half of the shorts and pin along the pocket opening and sew that in place. When it comes to the pocket, I followed step by step how the pattern instructions said to attach the pockets. Next, fold the pocket over so that they're going to be on what will eventually be the inside of the shorts, and then iron down that seam and pin it as well. Now top stitch that down. I swapped out the bottom bobbin to be a white thread so that it matched the pocket fabric, and kept the top thread red so that it matched the shorts fabric. Now pin the back side of the pocket to the front side of the pocket and sew around the pocket edge, making sure you aren't sewing it to the shorts or anything like that. It should just be pocket to pocket. Now with the pocket in place, the front half of the shorts are complete, and we can pin the two halves together, right sides together, and sew along the sides. Be sure when doing this that the pockets are nice and flat. It may help if you pin it along the top edge where the pockets do overlap with the short fabric in the front. Sew along where we just pinned. Along the center or inner leg seam and sew that down. Roll over the raw edges of the bottom of the shorts twice and then sew that down the same way we did with the top. And you can also go ahead and stitch that pocket into place along the top where the pants overlap the pocket to make the next step a little easier, which is attaching the waistband. I made the waistband the same way that I made the bias for the top, only it's thinner. It was a 3-inch wide waistband that was the length of the waist of the pants. Once that waistband was all ironed out, I pinned and sewed that to the top of the pants as you see me doing here, and I left one of the seams open because we do need to slide elastic in next. Cut out a piece of elastic that will fit snugly around your waist. I used a 1-inch elastic and a safety pin to help me slide the elastic through the waistband. Make sure that once one end is all the way through, like it's at the very start or opening of the waistband, you pin it so that you don't pull the elastic all the way through, and then pin the other end once that end is at the opening as well. Make sure a teeny bit of the elastic band is sticking out of either end of the waistband, just a teeny bit, and then pin and sew the waistband shut. And now the shorts are done onto the white shirt. To make the white shirt, I used the same exact pattern that I used for the red shirt and did it pretty much the same exact way. The only difference for the white shirt is I did not attach the sleeves, or I don't have any sleeves for it. So I pinned along the sides sides of the shirt and the shoulder of the shirt, leaving a hole open for my arms to go through on both sides, and then sewed down where I had pinned. Next, I took my iron and pressed open those seams. Double fold over the raw edges around the armhole opening and the bottom of the white shirt, and then sew that down and then iron that. Then make the extra large bias tape the same way that I did with the last one, by folding over the edges once, ironing that down, and then folding the entire thing in half and ironing that down. Pin the bias tape to the top along the neckline and opening of the shirt, and sew that down, cutting off some of the excess fabric when it comes to the bottom of the bias tape and leaving about 1/2 inch so that you can tuck it in and then sew that shut so you have a nice finished edge at the bottom. And that'll finish up the white shirt. Now on to the gloves. For the gloves, I made the pattern myself and then cut that out in red fabric. Add little notches around the curved edge of the outer part of the glove so that it makes folding over that fabric easier, which is what I do next. I fold over that fabric, double fold it so that it's facing inward so that there's a nice clean hem along the top of the gloves, and then pin that down. I also iron it because it made it a lot easier to sew and work with. Make sure when you're doing this that the gloves mirror each other or are flipped or reversed, because you need one for each hand, so they need to be opposite. Then I sewed down what I just pinned. Now it's time to add the elastic to the gloves, and for that I used 1/2 inch of elastic. Cut 2 pieces of elastic that fit around your middle finger and 2 that fit around your wrist. To create the bottom half of the gloves, I had leftover belt material that I had already sewn, so I just used that. Basically, you just want a rectangle that is about 2 or so inches wide and long enough to ruffle around your wrist. Cut 4 of those, place 2 and 2 together, sew along the bottom edge, flip it right side out, and then iron that down. Pin the elastic for the finger to the gloves on top of the gloves, like on the outer side of the gloves, and then do the same for the elastic that goes around the wrist to the bottom half of the glove, like the piece of fabric that you just saw me working with and cutting out. So the elastic for the finger in place using a zigzag stitch, and then sew the elastic for the bottom half of the glove in place using a zigzag stitch as well, but this time you're going to stretch it as you sew, like stretch the elastic. You want to stretch the elastic so that it goes from one end of the bottom half of the glove to the other end. Again, for all of the elastic, you are sewing it on top of the red fabric because you want it to show in the final result. Pin that piece on top of the top half of the glove, stretching the elastic from one end to the other end as you sew it into place. Fold the elastic for the finger right sides together and sew that shut with a zigzag stitch. Then fold the entire glove shut right sides together and sew that down. Then fold it back so that it's right side out and the glove is completed. Cut off any loose threads too. Now on to the cape and scarf. I created a pattern for both of these, by the way, and all of the patterns that I make are up on my store Envy and Etsy, which are linked in the description. Anyways, moving on, for both of these pieces, they are double layered. However, when it comes to the scarf, I designed it so that the pattern just kind of flows into one another and I could just fold it in half later, so I only needed to cut out one of each piece of the scarf. But for the cape, I cut out 2 of each pieces. You'll get a better idea of how this looks and why I did this in a little bit, or if you have my pattern, you'll see what it looks like then. Anyways, I started by piecing together the scarf pieces and the cape pieces, and then sewing those all shut. She's got a lot of decorative or patchwork seams on her scarf and cape, so that's what I'm sewing together so that by the end of this I have one big scarf piece and 2 cape pieces that are mirrored or reversed or opposite. You need to be sure that this is mirrored or reversed because the design isn't symmetrical. Like her cape design is not the same on both sides, so if you don't mirror it or reverse it, it's going to end up flipped from the actual design. Press open all of those seams using an iron. Now it's time to add the decorative black stitching that she has on her scarf and cape, and to do this I used embroidery floss and I placed my stitches 1 inch apart and they were 1 inch in length. I used a pencil to mark these spots or markings on the inside of both the cape and scarf. As you can see here, only one side, which is the outside, goes straight across. The inside stitching is at a diagonal, which is why it was important to have both the scarf and cape be double layered. Well, the scarf is folded over and the cape is double layered, because the stitches on her design only ever go straight across. So if you had the cape, for example, be only 1 layer, that means one side would first have the raw edges of the seams, and it would also have the diagonal black stitches. the stitches are done, go ahead and fold the scarf in half so that the right sides are together, and then sew down or sew shut that open edge. You're also going to want to put the two cape pieces together, right sides together, and then pin and sew along the outer edges of the cape, but leave the very top edge open because you'll need to flip it inside out still, right side out. Near the top corners of the cape, sandwich a black ribbon in between the two layers of the cape and sew that into place. This is how I close my cape. I use a ribbon, I just tie it closed and it stays in place. Turn the cape right side out and then iron it, pressing those seams nice and flat. Before turning it right side out, you can snip away some excess fabric, especially at the corner, and that'll make these corners and curves lie a lot easier. Lie flat a lot easier, and the corners actually come to a point. Fold in the raw edges at the top so that they line up with one another, and iron that flat as well and pin that into place. Turn the scarf right side out and then iron it nice and flat, pressing down that seam that we just sewed. I'm using a French seam to close up the scarf, so I fold the scarf in half with the wrong sides or the inside of it together and then sew that down. Cut any excess fabric off, cutting it as close to the stitch line as possible, and then flip it so that the right sides are together and iron down that seam. Then sew that down, making sure to encase the raw edges back behind the stitch line. Then fold it right side out and bam, scarf is done with a nice French seam. Go back to the cape and top stitch that top edge down and closed. And the cape is done. Now we just have the leg pieces. For the leg pieces, I cut a large rectangle that is a little bit longer, like a few inches longer than the length of my leg, and a few inches wider than the width of my leg. I wanted these to be double layered, so I cut 4 rectangles. With right sides together, stitch along the top and bottom edge of both leg pieces. Then fold it right side out and press those seams down, or iron the entire thing so that it is nice and flat. Using fabric chalk, I mark a line that's about an inch or so down from the top and sew across that. This is just making a little bit of an encasing, I guess you can call it, for the elastic band. Fold the leg piece in half and sew up the side seam, leaving that little tube or encasing we just created open because we still need to slip in the elastic. Cut 2 pieces of elastic that fit snugly around the top of your leg just below the knee, and use a safety pin to slide that through the leg pieces, making sure to pin it at both the start and end points. Make sure a little piece of elastic is sticking out from either end, and then finish sewing up that side seam. Lastly, I took some ribbon and I made a bow. You can make a bow any which way you want to. I just placed it so that there were 2 loops together. I didn't actually tie it or anything like that. Instead, I hand sewed the bow so that it sat like this, like I hand sewed it in the center, and then I added a little loop around the center of the bow. You can totally just tie a bow like normal. I just liked how this looked. I used my sewing machine to tie that little loop around the center of the bow shut, and then my iron to press it flat, making sure not to press the actual loops of the bow, like the real loops of the bow, flat. Then I hand stitched the bow onto the center top of the leg pieces. And bam, my Moroha cosplay is complete. Hopefully you guys found this video helpful and enjoyed watching. Be sure to check out my other videos. I have a lot of cosplay tutorials, and if you want to see the final photos of this cosplay, follow me on Instagram, which is linked down in the description below. Thanks for watching, have a lovely day, and bye!